The snow came down so hard that Fiona Owens could no longer see the road ahead, and she knew with a sinking certainty that she and her daughter were going to die out here in this merciless white wilderness. She clutched the reins of the horse-drawn wagon tighter, her fingers numb despite the thick gloves, while 6-year-old Lily huddled beneath every blanket they owned in the back. The February wind howled across the northern Arizona territory like a living thing bent on their destruction, and Fiona cursed herself for the 100th time for not staying another night in Flagstaff before attempting the journey south to her sister's ranch near Winslow. "Mama, I'm cold," Lily's small voice carried over the wind, and it broke Fiona's heart because there was nothing more she could do. They had already stopped to add more layers, and the child was wrapped as well as possible given their circumstances. "I know, sweetheart. Just hold on a little longer." But Fiona did not know how much longer. The wagon lurched as one wheel hit something hidden beneath the snow, and the horse whinnied in protest. They had been traveling for hours, and what should have been a straightforward journey had turned into a nightmare when the unexpected blizzard swept down from the mountains. This was 1882, and while February in Arizona was typically mild, they were far enough north and at such elevation that winter could still strike with deadly force. The horse stumbled again, and this time Fiona felt the animal's exhaustion. They could not continue much longer. She squinted through the blinding white, searching desperately for any sign of shelter, any break in the storm, anything that might save them. Her late husband had died of fever the previous autumn, leaving her alone with Lily and a mountain of debt. The farm in Colorado had been lost, and her only option was to throw herself on her sister Margaret's mercy. Margaret had married a rancher and lived comfortably, and though pride had kept Fiona from asking for help sooner, desperation had finally won. Now it seemed her pride would cost her everything anyway. The wagon wheel hit a rock concealed beneath the snow, and this time the impact was too much. Fiona heard the sickening crack of wood splitting, and the wagon tilted violently to one side. The horse reared and broke free from the damaged traces, disappearing into the white storm before Fiona could even cry out. She was thrown from the driver's seat, landing hard in a drift that at least cushioned her fall. "Mama!" Lily's terrified scream cut through everything else, and Fiona scrambled back to the overturned wagon on hands and knees, fighting the wind and snow. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." She reached the wagon and found Lily trapped beneath the canvas cover and scattered supplies, but mercifully unhurt. Fiona pulled her daughter free and held her close, both of them shaking. The wagon was ruined, the horse gone, and they were stranded in a blizzard with night coming on fast. "We have to find shelter," Fiona said, though she could barely hear her own voice over the wind. She gathered what blankets she could salvage and wrapped them around both of them, then helped Lily to her feet. "Can you walk?" Lily nodded, her small face pale and frightened beneath her hood. They held onto each other and began to push forward through the snow, though Fiona had no idea which direction to go. She only knew they would freeze if they stayed with the wagon. Every step was a battle against the wind and the deepening drifts, and within minutes Fiona's legs burned with exhaustion. Lily stumbled repeatedly, and Fiona ended up carrying her, though she had no idea how long she could manage it. The world had become nothing but white and cold and the sound of wind. Fiona's mind began to play tricks on her, and she thought she saw shapes in the storm that vanished when she blinked. Her feet were numb, her arms aching from carrying Lily, and she knew they were dying. This was how it ended, lost in the snow, 2 more casualties of the harsh frontier. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Lily, though her daughter could not hear. "I'm so sorry." She did not know how much longer she walked. Time lost meaning. There was only the next step, and the next, and the desperate need to keep moving because stopping meant death. When her legs finally gave out, she collapsed into the snow with Lily still in her arms, and she wrapped her body around her daughter to provide what little warmth remained. This was where they would be found come spring, she thought distantly. Two frozen bodies beneath the melting snow, but then there was a sound, something other than the wind. A voice, deep and commanding, shouting something she could not make out. Fiona tried to lift her head, tried to see, but everything was white and her body would not obey anymore. Strong hands touched her shoulders, turning her over, and a face appeared above her, partially obscured by a snow-covered hat and thick scarf. Dark eyes stared down at her with fierce intensity. "You're both safe," the man said, and his voice cut through the storm like an anchor to reality. "I've got you now. Just hold on." Fiona wanted to respond, wanted to thank him, but darkness was closing in at the edges of her vision. She felt herself being lifted, felt Lily being taken from her arms, and then there was movement and the sense of being carried. She fought to stay conscious, terrified that if she let go she would never wake up, but her body had reached its limit. The last thing she heard was the man's voice again, low and reassuring, telling her she was going to be all right. When consciousness returned, it came slowly, like swimming up through deep water. Fiona became aware of warmth first, blessed warmth that seemed impossible after the cold. Then she heard the crackle of a fire and smelled wood smoke. Her body ached everywhere, and her fingers and toes burned with the particular pain of frostbite being treated. She tried to open her eyes, and after several attempts, managed it. She was lying on a bed in a small cabin, covered with thick furs and blankets. A fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing cheerfully behind the iron grate. The cabin was sparsely furnished but well built, with solid log walls and a sturdy roof that kept out the sound of the continuing storm. And sitting in a chair next to the bed, watching her with those same dark eyes, was the man who had found them. He was perhaps 30, with weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors and dark hair that fell past his collar. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and he wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy. Wool shirt, leather vest, canvas trousers, and boots. His hat hung on a peg by the door, and Fiona could see snowmelt puddled beneath it. "Lily," Fiona croaked, trying to sit up. Her throat was raw and her voice barely worked. "Easy," the man said, rising and gently pressing her back down. "Your daughter's fine. She's sleeping in the other room. She woke up a few hours ago, ate some stew, and went right back to sleep. The little one's tougher than she looks." Relief flooded through Fiona so intensely that tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us." "No thanks needed. I was checking my traps when I spotted your wagon tracks, then found the wreck, followed your trail from there." He returned to his chair. "Name's Xavier Frost. This is my line cabin, part of the Rockingham Ranch. I winter up here keeping an eye on the cattle in the high country." "Fiona Owens," she managed. "We were trying to reach Winslow. My sister lives on a ranch there." Xavier nodded slowly. "You picked a hell of a time to travel. This storm came out of nowhere. The high country can be deadly in winter, even in Arizona territory." "I know. I was foolish." Fresh tears threatened, and Fiona blinked them back. "I just wanted to get Lily somewhere safe, somewhere we could start over." Something in Xavier's expression softened slightly. "Well, you're safe now. Storm should blow over by tomorrow, but you're going to need a few days to recover before you can travel. You've got frostbite on your fingers and toes, nothing that won't heal, but you need rest and warmth." Fiona looked at her hands and saw the bandages wrapped around her fingers. The burning sensation made sense now. "What about the horse? Our supplies? I'll go back to the wagon once the storm clears and see what can be salvaged. The horse probably made it down to lower ground. Animals have good sense about survival. Xavier stood and moved to the fireplace where a pot hung over the flames. You should eat something. You need to get your strength back. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to her, then helped prop her up with pillows so she could manage eating on her own despite her bandaged hands. The stew was simple but hearty, venison and vegetables in a rich broth, and Fiona realized she was desperately hungry. Xavier watched until he was satisfied she could manage, then moved away to give her privacy. "How long have I been unconscious?" Fiona asked between bites. "Found you yesterday afternoon. It's morning now, so almost 18 hours. Xavier stood by the window, looking out at the white landscape. The storm was still raging, snow piling against the cabin walls. "You were in bad shape. Both of you were hypothermic when I brought you in. Had to warm you up slow, and I'll admit I wasn't sure you'd make it." The matter-of-fact way he said it sent a chill through Fiona despite the warmth of the cabin. They had been that close to death. If this man had not found them, if he had been anywhere else, she and Lily would have frozen in the snow. "I owe you our lives," she said quietly. Xavier glanced back at her, and something in his expression was difficult to read. "You don't owe me anything. This is just what people do out here. We look after each other because the land sure won't." Over the next few hours, as Fiona regained more of her strength, she learned more about her rescuer. Xavier Frost was indeed a cowboy working for the Rockingham Ranch, one of the larger cattle operations in the territory. He had been working the high country line camps for 5 winters now, preferring the solitude to the crowded bunkhouse at the main ranch. He was unmarried, had no family to speak of, and seemed content with his solitary existence. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and deliberate. When Fiona was strong enough to stand, Xavier led her to the cabin's second room, which was little more than a storage area with a second bed. Lily was sleeping there, her small face peaceful beneath a pile of blankets. Fiona sat beside her daughter and stroked her hair, fresh tears of gratitude flowing freely now. "She was asking for you when she woke up," Xavier said from the doorway. "I told her you were resting and that you'd be fine. She's a brave little girl." "She's had to be," Fiona said softly. "Her father died last autumn. We lost everything." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you." Fiona stood carefully, her legs still weak. "You've been very kind to us. I hope we're not too much of an imposition." "No imposition. I don't get much company up here, and it'll be good to have voices other than my own for a while." Xavier gestured back toward the main room. "Come on, you should sit by the fire. The cold gets into your bones deep when you've been as far gone as you were." They returned to the main room, and Fiona settled into the chair Xavier had been occupying. He busied himself with checking supplies and maintaining the fire, and Fiona found herself watching him. There was something steady and reassuring about the way he moved, an economy of motion that spoke of competence and self-reliance. He was not a handsome man in the conventional sense, his features too rough and weathered for that, but there was something compelling about him nonetheless. "How often do you get down to the main ranch?" Fiona asked, partly to make conversation and partly from genuine curiosity. "Every few weeks when the weather's good. I have to check in with the foreman and get supplies. But in winter, especially during storms like this, I might be up here alone for a month or more." Xavier glanced at her. "Doesn't bother me much. I like the quiet." "I think I would go mad," Fiona admitted. "I've always been around people. My family, my husband's family, neighbors. Even after we lost the farm, there were people at the boarding house in Colorado Springs. Different folks need different things," Xavier said with a shrug. I spent enough years around people to know I prefer cattle and mountains. There was clearly a story there, but Fiona did not press. Instead, she asked, "What will you do when the storm clears? Can you take us to Winslow?" Xavier considered. The main ranch is closer, about a half-day's ride in good weather. Winslow's a full day or more from here. Best thing would be to get you down to the Rockingham first, let you recover properly, then arrange transport to Winslow from there. The boss, Marcus Redding, he's a fair man. He'll help. We don't have money to pay for passage, Fiona said, hating to admit it but knowing she had to be honest. Didn't ask if you did, Xavier replied. Like I said, Marcus is a fair man. We'll figure something out. His simple confidence was somehow both reassuring and intimidating. Fiona was not used to accepting charity, had always prided herself on standing on her own feet, but circumstances had stripped away her pride. She had a daughter to think of, and if accepting help was what it took to keep Lily safe, then she would swallow her pride and be grateful. The day passed slowly. The storm continued to rage outside, and Lily woke in the early afternoon, confused and frightened until Fiona held her and explained what had happened. Xavier greeted the child with gruff kindness, and Lily seemed to sense that this strange man was their protector. She stayed close to Fiona but watched Xavier with wide, curious eyes as he moved about the cabin. For dinner, Xavier produced biscuits to go with more stew, and they sat around the small table together. It was strange and intimate, this makeshift family unit trapped together by the storm. Xavier was clearly unused to company, especially female company, and he seemed uncertain how to act around them. But he was unfailingly polite and considerate, making sure Lily had the best parts of the meal and that Fiona had everything she needed. That night, Xavier insisted Fiona and Lily take the bed in the main room while he slept in the storage room. Fiona protested, knowing he was giving up his own bed, but he would not hear otherwise. She lay in the darkness with Lily warm against her side, listening to the wind howl, and felt the first stirrings of something she had not expected, an attraction to the taciturn cowboy who had saved their lives. It was absurd, she told herself. She had been widowed less than 6 months. She was in no position to think about such things, especially not with her current circumstances. And yet she could not stop thinking about the way Xavier's eyes had softened when he looked at Lily, or the gentle care he had taken with Fiona's frostbitten hands, or the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from him. She forced the thoughts away and tried to sleep. The storm finally broke on the morning of the 3rd day. Fiona woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows, bright and almost painful after the gray gloom of the blizzard. Xavier was already up and dressed, standing at the door and looking out at the transformed landscape. "It's beautiful," Fiona said, joining him. The world outside was buried in white, the snow sparkling like diamonds in the morning light. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the air had that particular crystalline quality that comes after a storm. "And deadly," Xavier added. "The snow's deep. We'll need to wait another day or two for it to settle and pack down before we can travel safely. I need to check on the cattle today, make sure they survived. There's a sheltered canyon where most of them should have waited out the storm. Can we come with you?" Lily asked, appearing at Fiona's side. The child had recovered quickly, her youth and resilience bouncing back faster than Fiona's. Xavier looked at Lily, then at Fiona. "It'll be cold and the walking's rough. We've been cooped up in here for 2 days, Fiona said. "I think some fresh air would do us good if we're not a burden." "No burden," Xavier said after a moment. "But dress warm, all the layers you have." They bundled up in every piece of clothing they could manage, and Xavier produced an extra coat and scarf for Lily. Then they set out into the white world, following Xavier as he broke trail through the snow. It was hard going, and Fiona quickly realized how weak she still was, but the sunshine and fresh air were glorious after the confinement of the cabin. Xavier led them to a canyon about a mile from the cabin, and there they found perhaps 20 head of cattle, shaggy and snow-dusted, but alive. Xavier counted them carefully, checking for injuries or signs of distress. A few had minor frostbite on their ears, but overall they had weathered the storm well. "They're tougher than they look," Xavier said, echoing what he had said about Lily. "Longhorns know how to survive." Fiona watched him work, noting the care he took with each animal, the way he spoke softly to them as he checked them over. There was real affection there, and it struck her that Xavier was far less alone than he claimed. These animals were his companions, his charges, and he took his responsibility to them seriously. On the walk back to the cabin, Lily ran ahead, laughing as she tried to catch snowflakes, and Xavier and Fiona followed at a slower pace. The sun was warm despite the cold air, and for a moment it was possible to forget the desperate circumstances that had brought them here. "She's a good child," Xavier said, watching Lily. "You've done well with her." "I've tried," Fiona said. "It hasn't been easy since my husband died." He was a good father, even if he was not always a practical man. He had dreams that were bigger than his means, and in the end, that cost us everything. Xavier glanced at her. "You sound angry." Fiona considered that. "I suppose I am, a little. He left us in debt with no way to pay it. If it was not for my sister agreeing to take us in, I do not know what would have become of us." She paused. "But I should not speak ill of the dead. He loved us and he did his best. Sometimes that is just not enough." "No," Xavier agreed quietly. "Sometimes it's not." They walked in silence for a while, and then Fiona asked, "What about you? You said you have no family." "None living," Xavier said. "My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both the same winter. I was raised by an uncle who did not want me, and I left as soon as I was old enough. Been on my own ever since." "That must have been lonely," Xavier shrugged. "You get used to it. Besides, I've got the cattle, the mountains, the sky. That's company enough." But Fiona heard something in his voice that suggested otherwise. A loneliness that he had buried so deep he might not even recognize it anymore. She wondered what it would take to draw this man out of his self-imposed isolation, and then wondered why she was even thinking such thoughts. That evening, as they shared another meal, the atmosphere in the cabin felt different, more comfortable, more like a real family than three strangers thrown together by circumstance. Lily chattered about the cattle and the snow and everything she had seen, and Xavier listened with patient attention, occasionally interjecting a comment or answering a question. Fiona found herself smiling more than she had in months, and when Xavier's eyes met hers across the table, something passed between them that made her heart beat faster. After Lily was asleep, Fiona and Xavier sat by the fire, and the conversation turned more personal. Xavier told her about his years working various ranches across the territory, about the harsh winters and dry summers, about the occasional conflicts with rustlers, and the more frequent struggles with the land itself. Fiona talked about her life in Colorado, about her marriage and the slow decline of their fortunes, about the decision to give up everything and start over. "It takes courage to start over," Xavier said. "Most people just stay where they are, even when it's killing them." "I did not feel courageous," Fiona admitted. "I felt desperate. I still do, honestly. I am throwing myself on my sister's mercy, and I have no idea if she will even want us there. We exchanged letters, but that was months ago. She said we could come, but what if she changed her mind? What if her husband does not want us? Then you'll figure something else out," Xavier said with simple certainty. "You're stronger than you think. You survived that storm, and that's no small thing. Only because you found us. But you kept moving. You kept your daughter alive. That was all you. Xavier poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up. People underestimate what they are capable of until they are tested. You were tested, and you did not fail. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes at his words. No one had told her she was strong in so long. Her husband had loved her, but had never really seen her as anything but someone to be protected and provided for. He had made all the decisions, and when those decisions failed, he had left her to pick up the pieces. Xavier's simple acknowledgement of her strength meant more than he could possibly know. "Thank you," she said softly. Xavier looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes were warm. Just the truth. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Then Xavier stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "You should get some rest. We'll head down to the main ranch day after tomorrow if the weather holds." Fiona nodded and rose as well, though part of her wanted to stay by the fire and continue talking. But Xavier was right. It was late, and they needed their rest. She said good night and retired to the bed where Lily was already sleeping, but she lay awake for a long time, thinking about the man in the other room and the unexpected feelings he stirred in her. The next day was spent preparing for the journey down to the main ranch. Xavier checked and rechecked his supplies, packed provisions for the trip, and made sure his horse was ready for the trek. He also hiked back to where Fiona's wagon had overturned and managed to salvage some of their belongings, though much had been lost or damaged beyond repair. Still, he returned with Fiona's small trunk of clothes and personal items, and the few precious photographs she had of her late husband and their life together. "Thank you," Fiona said, going through the trunk with trembling hands. "I thought all of this was lost." "The wagon's done for," Xavier said, "but I marked the spot. Once the snow melts, we can probably salvage more." That evening, their last in the cabin felt bittersweet. Fiona had grown to love this small, rough shelter, not for itself, but for what it represented. Safety, warmth, and the unexpected connection she had formed with Xavier. Tomorrow they would leave, and once they reached the main ranch, she and Lily would continue on to Winslow. This interlude would end, and she might never see Xavier Frost again. The thought bothered her more than it should have. After Lily was asleep, Fiona found the courage to say something she had been thinking about all day. Xavier was cleaning his rifle by the fire, and she sat across from him, watching his capable hands work. "Xavier," she began, and he looked up. "I just wanted to say that these past few days, despite how they started, have been good. You have been very kind to us, and I want you to know that it has meant a great deal to both of us." Xavier set the rifle aside. "It's been good having you here," he admitted. "Makes the cabin feel less empty." "Do you ever think about doing something else?" Fiona asked. "Living somewhere with people around, maybe having a family." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "I did once," he said finally, "when I was younger. I was even engaged once to a girl in Texas, but she did not want the life I could offer. She wanted stability, a house in town, a husband who came home every night. I wanted the range, the freedom. We could not reconcile it, so we parted ways. Do you regret it? I did for a while, but I think we both made the right choice. She married a shopkeeper, and last I heard they were very happy, and I am content with my life." He paused, "or I was." The last three words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Fiona's heart raced. "And now," Xavier met her eyes directly, "now I find myself thinking that maybe I've been alone too long, that maybe there are things worth coming down from the mountain for." Fiona could barely breathe. "Xavier, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know your situation. You are widowed. You are trying to rebuild your life. You have your daughter to think of. I am not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that meeting you has changed something in me, made me realize what I have been missing." Fiona wanted to tell him that she felt the same way, that in these few short days he had awakened something in her that she thought had died with her husband. But the words stuck in her throat. It was too soon, too complicated, too uncertain. Instead, she said, "I am glad we met you, Xavier." "Whatever happens, I am glad." He nodded slowly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." The journey down to the Rockingham Ranch was indeed long and difficult. The snow was deep, and even with Xavier's horse breaking trail, the going was slow. Xavier insisted Lily ride on the horse while he and Fiona walked, and they took turns holding the lead rope. The sun was bright and the sky clear, but the cold was bitter, and by midday, Fiona's legs were trembling with exhaustion. Xavier noticed and called a halt, making them rest and eat some of the provisions he had packed. He built a small fire to warm them up, and they huddled around it gratefully. Lily was holding up remarkably well, her childish energy seemingly boundless, but Fiona could see the strain in Xavier's face. He was worried about them, about getting them down safely. "How much farther?" Fiona asked. "Another 3 hours, maybe 4. The ranch headquarters is in the valley, and the trail gets easier once we get through this pass." Xavier glanced at the sky. "Weather's holding, which is good, but I will not lie to you, Fiona. This is rough country and you are still recovering. If you need to stop more, we will." "I will make it," Fiona said with determination. "We have come this far." Xavier smiled slightly. "Yes, you have." They pressed on, and as Xavier had promised, the trail became easier as they descended. By late afternoon, Fiona could see buildings in the distance, and Xavier pointed out the Rockingham Ranch headquarters. It was a substantial operation, with a large main house, several barns and outbuildings, and a long bunkhouse. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and Fiona could see horses in the corrals and cattle scattered across the snowy valley. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn and waved. Xavier waved back, and soon they were being greeted by a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s with graying hair and a weathered but friendly face. "Xavier, damn, we were starting to worry about you," the man said, then noticed Fiona and Lily. "What's this?" "Found them in the storm, Marcus," Xavier said. "This is Fiona Owens and her daughter Lily. Their wagon overturned in the blizzard. I brought them to the line cabin to recover." Marcus Redding, for this was clearly the ranch owner, looked at Fiona and Lily with concern and compassion. "Madam, I am so sorry. That storm was a beast. You are fortunate Xavier found you." He turned and called toward the house. "Sarah, we have guests." A woman appeared on the porch of the main house, and within minutes, Fiona and Lily were being ushered inside, surrounded by warmth and concern. Sarah Redding was a plump, motherly woman in her early 40s, and she immediately took charge, insisting Fiona and Lily sit by the fire while she prepared hot food and drink. "You poor dears," Sarah said, fussing over them. "You must have been terrified, but you are safe now. Xavier is the best hand we have, and if he brought you down, then you are in good hands." Over the next hour, Fiona explained their situation to the Reddings, telling them about her husband's death, the loss of their farm, and their attempt to reach her sister in Winslow. Marcus and Sarah listened sympathetically, and when she finished, Marcus said, "Well, you will stay here until you are fully recovered and until we can arrange proper transport to Winslow. We have a guest room and you are welcome to use it as long as you need." "I cannot impose," Fiona began, but Sarah waved her objections away. "Nonsense. This is what neighbors do. Besides, it will be nice to have another woman around. I get tired of being surrounded by rough cowboys all the time." She smiled warmly. "You and Lily will stay with us, and that is final." Fiona felt tears of gratitude well up. Thank you. Thank you so much. That evening, after Lily was settled in the guest room, Fiona found herself back downstairs, looking for Xavier. She learned from one of the ranch hands that he had gone to the bunkhouse, and she walked across the yard in the twilight, her breath misting in the cold air. The bunkhouse was long and low, with a stove at one end and rows of beds along the walls. About a dozen men were inside, some playing cards, others reading or mending clothes. They all looked up when Fiona entered, and a few whistled before an older man barked at them to mind their manners. Xavier was at the far end, settling his gear onto a bed. He looked up when he saw her, surprise crossing his face. "Fiona, is everything all right?" "Yes, everything is fine. I just wanted to thank you properly. I feel like I have not done that enough." She was very aware of the other men watching them, but she did not care. "You saved our lives, Xavier." "I will never forget that." Xavier ducked his head, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Just did what anyone would do." "No," Fiona said firmly, "not anyone. You went out of your way, you cared for us, you brought us to safety. That is not just anyone. That is you." The other men were grinning now, and one called out, "She's got you there, Xavier." Xavier shot them a quelling look, then turned back to Fiona. "I am glad you are safe. That is all that matters." Fiona wanted to say more, wanted to ask if she would see him again, but this was not the time or place. Instead, she nodded. "Good night, Xavier." "Good night, Fiona." As she walked back to the main house, she heard the catcalls and teasing from the bunkhouse, and despite everything, she found herself smiling. Fiona and Lily ended up staying at the Rockingham for nearly 2 weeks. The snow was slow to melt, and Fiona's frostbite needed time to heal properly. Sarah Redding was a wonderful hostess, treating them like family, and Lily thrived with the attention and the excitement of ranch life. She followed the Cowboys around, pestering them with questions, and they tolerated her with amused patience. Fiona saw Xavier every day. He had to stay at the main ranch to help with the extra work caused by the storm, checking on cattle, repairing damage, and hauling supplies. He always made time to speak with her, and their conversations grew longer and deeper. They talked about everything: their pasts, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Fiona found herself looking forward to these moments with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. It was too soon, she kept telling herself. She was still in mourning, still figuring out her life. But her heart did not care about timing or propriety. Her heart wanted Xavier Frost, the quiet cowboy who had saved her life and shown her what true strength looked like. One evening, about 10 days into their stay, Xavier asked if she would like to take a walk. The weather had warmed considerably, and much of the snow had melted, leaving the ground muddy but passable. They walked along the creek that ran through the ranch property, the water rushing and cold with snowmelt. "I have been thinking," Xavier said after they had walked in comfortable silence for a while, "about what you said about starting over." Fiona's heart began to beat faster. "What about it?" "I have been wondering if maybe I should do the same. Start over, I mean." Xavier stopped walking and turned to face her. "Fiona, I know this is sudden, and I know your situation is complicated, but I have to say this because if I do not, I will regret it for the rest of my life." Fiona could barely breathe. "Say what?" "I am falling in love with you," Xavier said simply. "I think I have been since the moment I found you in that storm. These past weeks, getting to know you, seeing how strong and brave and kind you are, it has just confirmed what I felt from the start. I love you, Fiona, and I love Lily. And if there is any chance, any possibility that you might feel the same, I want to know." Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks. "Xavier, yes, I feel the same. I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it is too soon, but I cannot help it." You make me feel safe and seen and valued in a way I have never felt before. Even with my husband, God rest his soul, I never felt this way." Xavier stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "Then stay. Do not go to Winslow. Stay here with me. We can build a life together. I will leave the line camps, work here at the main ranch where there are people and schools for Lily. Marcus has been wanting me to take on more responsibility anyway. We can get married, be a family." Fiona wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to throw herself into his arms and never let go. But she forced herself to think, to consider what this meant. "My sister is expecting us, and I barely know you, Xavier. What we feel is real, I believe that, but is it enough to build a life on?" "I think it is," Xavier said. "But if you need time, we can take time. Go to Winslow, see your sister, make sure that is not the right path. I will wait. However long it takes, I will wait for you." Fiona shook her head. "I do not want to wait. I have wasted enough of my life on uncertainty and half measures. What I feel for you is real and strong and true. But I need to go to Winslow, at least to explain to my sister. She has been kind enough to offer us a home. I owe her that courtesy." "Then I will take you," Xavier said. "And when you are ready, whether that is next week or next month or next year, I will be here." Fiona reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough texture of his beard beneath her fingers. "What if I am ready now? What if I go to Winslow, thank my sister for her offer, and come right back?" Xavier's eyes widened slightly. "You would do that? For you? For us?" "Yes." Fiona smiled through her tears. "I have learned that life is too short and too uncertain to waste time. I almost died in that storm, Xavier. I almost lost Lily. That experience taught me that when you find something worth holding on to, you do not let it go." Xavier pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight, and Fiona felt a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. This was where she was meant to be. Not with her sister, not starting over alone, but here with this man who had saved her life and captured her heart. They kissed for the first time there by the creek, with the water rushing beside them and the mountains looming above. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you," Fiona said again, wanting to hear the words to make them real. "I love you too," Xavier replied. "Both of you. I promise I will be a good husband to you and a good father to Lily." "I know you will," Fiona said, and she meant it. They walked back to the ranch hand in hand, and when they told the Reddings their news, Sarah clapped her hands in delight and immediately began planning a wedding. Marcus shook Xavier's hand and clapped him on the back, clearly pleased for his longtime employee and friend. The trip to Winslow was made a week later, with Xavier accompanying Fiona and Lily. They took a wagon borrowed from the Reddings and made the journey in 2 days. Fiona's sister Margaret was surprised to see them arrive with a cowboy in tow, and even more surprised when Fiona explained the situation. Margaret's ranch was prosperous and well run, and her husband Henry seemed like a decent enough man. They made it clear that Fiona and Lily were still welcome to stay, but Fiona could see the relief in Margaret's eyes when she explained that she was going to return to the Rockingham and marry Xavier. "Are you sure?" Margaret asked when they had a moment alone. "You hardly know this man." "I know enough," Fiona said firmly. "I know he is good and kind and strong. I know he saved our lives, and I know I love him. That is enough." Margaret looked at her sister for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I am happy for you. You deserve a fresh start, and if this cowboy is it, then I wish you both all the happiness in the world." They stayed in Winslow for 3 days, allowing Fiona to rest and visit with her sister properly. But Fiona was eager to return to the Rockingham, to begin her new life, and on the morning of the 4th day, they set out on the journey back. Lily was thrilled about the prospect of Xavier becoming her father. She had taken to him immediately, and he had shown infinite patience with her endless questions and boundless energy. On the trip back, she chattered constantly about the wedding and what their life would be like, and both Fiona and Xavier listened with smiling indulgence. They were married a month later, on a bright April day when the valley was beginning to green with spring growth. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with all the hands in attendance along with families from neighboring ranches. Sarah Redding orchestrated everything with joyful efficiency, and Fiona wore a dress borrowed from a neighbor, simple but pretty. Xavier wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut and his beard trimmed, and when he saw Fiona walking toward him, his face lit up with such love and joy that several people in attendance teared up. The ceremony was conducted by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through, and when Xavier and Fiona exchanged their vows, there was not a dry eye present. Lily stood beside them, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, she cheered loudly, making everyone laugh. Xavier kissed his new bride, then swept Lily up into his arms, making the moment complete. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with food and music and dancing. Fiona found herself passed from partner to partner as the cowboys insisted on dancing with the bride, but her eyes always returned to Xavier. He was not much of a dancer, but he held her close when it was his turn, and whispered in her ear how beautiful she was and how lucky he felt. When the party finally wound down and the guests departed or retired to the bunkhouse, Xavier carried a sleeping Lily to their new home, a small cabin on the ranch property that Marcus had offered them as a wedding gift. It was modest but well built, with 2 rooms and a real glass window. Fiona had spent the past weeks making it into a home, sewing curtains and arranging the few pieces of furniture they owned. Xavier laid Lily in the small bed in the second room, and Fiona tucked her in, kissing her daughter's forehead. Then she and Xavier retired to their own room, and for the first time they came together as husband and wife. It was tender and passionate and everything Fiona had hoped for, and afterward, lying in Xavier's arms, she felt a peace and contentment she had never known before. Happy, Xavier murmured, running his fingers through her hair. More than I ever thought possible, Fiona replied honestly. Who would have thought that getting lost in a snowstorm would lead to this? Xavier chuckled. Life has a strange way of working out. If you had not been caught in that blizzard, if I had not been checking my traps right then, if any of 100 things had been different, we never would have met. Then I am grateful for that storm, Fiona said. As terrible as it was, it brought me to you. It brought us both to each other, Xavier corrected, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. I could never regret this, Fiona said, kissing him. Never. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Xavier took on more responsibility at the Rockingham, working as the assistant foreman under Marcus's supervision. He no longer spent long weeks alone in the line camps, but instead came home every evening to Fiona and Lily. The work was hard and the hours long, but Xavier thrived on having a purpose beyond simple survival, and Fiona could see how happy he was. Fiona threw herself into making their cabin a home and becoming part of the ranch community. Sarah Redding became a close friend, teaching her the ins and outs of frontier life and introducing her to other ranch wives in the area. Lily started attending the small school in the nearby town, riding there each day with the Reddings' children, and she blossomed under the attention and structure. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier on a cold December evening, and the joy on his face was something she would remember for the rest of her life. He held her carefully, as if she were made of glass, and whispered his love and gratitude. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Fiona asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xavier said. "Fiona, you have given me everything. A family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning. And now a child of our own. I never thought I would have any of this." "You deserve all of it," Fiona said firmly. "You are a good man, Xavier Frost, the best man I have ever known." They told Lily that evening, and the little girl was ecstatic at the prospect of being a big sister. She immediately began planning what she would teach the baby and how she would help take care of it, and her enthusiasm was infectious. The winter was mild that year, nothing like the terrible blizzard that had brought Fiona and Xavier together, and when spring arrived, it brought with it new life in more ways than one. Fiona gave birth to a healthy baby boy on a warm May evening, with Sarah Redding acting as midwife and Xavier pacing anxiously outside the cabin. When Sarah finally emerged and told him he could come in, Xavier rushed to Fiona's side. She was exhausted but radiant, holding their newborn son wrapped in a soft blanket. Xavier stared at the tiny face, overcome with emotion, and when Fiona placed the baby in his arms, tears streamed down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Fiona asked, watching her husband with their son. Xavier thought for a moment. "Thomas, after my father, if that is all right with you." "Thomas Frost," Fiona said, testing the name. "I love it." Lily was allowed in shortly after, and she stared at her new brother with wide eyes. "He is so small," she said in awe. "You were that small once," Fiona told her. "And Xavier will love him just as much as he loves you. You are both his children now." Lily looked at Xavier, who nodded. "That is right. You are my daughter, Lily, just as much as Thomas is my son. I love you both." Lily beamed and carefully touched her brother's tiny hand. "I am going to be the best big sister ever," she declared, and she was. As Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler, Lily was his constant companion and protector. She helped Fiona care for him, teaching him to walk and talk, and playing endless games to keep him entertained. Xavier watched his growing family with quiet satisfaction, marveling at how much his life had changed in such a short time. The years passed peacefully. Xavier continued to work at the Rockingham, eventually becoming foreman when Marcus Redding decided to step back from the day-to-day operations. It was a position of respect and authority, and Xavier took his responsibilities seriously. The ranch prospered under his management, and the Reddings made it clear that Xavier was more than just an employee. He was family. When Thomas was 3 years old, Fiona gave birth to twin girls, much to everyone's surprise and delight. The girls, named Emma and Grace, were identical and mischievous from the start, keeping everyone on their toes. Xavier built an addition onto their cabin to accommodate the growing family, and Fiona filled the rooms with love and laughter. Lily grew into a beautiful and capable young woman, eventually marrying one of the neighboring rancher's sons when she was 19. Xavier walked her down the aisle, and Fiona cried tears of joy watching her daughter begin her own life. But Lily and her husband settled on a nearby ranch, so she remained close, and Fiona saw her regularly. As the children grew and the years accumulated, Fiona and Xavier's love only deepened. They had their share of hardships, droughts that tested the ranch, illnesses that frightened them, the normal struggles of frontier life, but they faced everything together, and their partnership was unshakable. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Fiona back to the line cabin where he had first brought her after rescuing her from the storm. It was maintained as a working line camp, but it held a special place in both their hearts. They spent the day there, reminiscing about those early days and marveling at how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked as they sat on the cabin porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Staying here instead of going to your sister's." Fiona took his hand and squeezed it. "Never. Not for a single moment. You saved my life that day, Xavier, but you did more than that. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and family and a home. How could I ever regret that?" Xavier smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. "I was just a lonely cowboy who did not know what he was missing. You showed me what life could be." "We showed each other," Fiona corrected. "That is what love does. It shows us who we can be." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging, but their lives had been transformed by a chance meeting in a blizzard all those years ago. Thomas grew up to be a strong, capable young man with his father's quiet nature and his mother's warm heart. He chose to stay at the Rocking M, working alongside Xavier and learning the ranching business. Emma and Grace, the twins, were wild and independent, but deeply loving. Emma married a schoolteacher and moved to Flagstaff, while Grace surprised everyone by becoming a nurse and dedicating herself to helping the sick and injured throughout the territory. When Marcus Redding passed away at the age of 72, he left a portion of the Rocking M to Xavier in his will, recognizing the decades of loyal service and the improvements Xavier had made to the operation. Sarah insisted Xavier and Fiona move into the main house, as it was too large for her alone, and they did so with mixed feelings. The cabin had been their home for so long, but the main house offered more space for their children and grandchildren when they visited. Sarah Redding lived another 10 years after her husband's death, and when she passed peacefully in her sleep, she left the remainder of the ranch to Xavier, with a note thanking him for being the son she had never had. Xavier wept when he read her words, and Fiona held him as he grieved the loss of a woman who had been so instrumental in their happiness. The Rocking M became the Frost Ranch, though many still called it by its old name. Xavier and Fiona ran it together, with Thomas taking on more and more responsibility as Xavier aged. The ranch continued to prosper, known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and fair dealings. Grandchildren came, and then great-grandchildren. Lily had 4 children, Thomas 3, Emma 2, and Grace, though she married late, had 1 daughter whom she adored. The house was constantly full of family, and holidays were loud, chaotic, joyful affairs that Fiona orchestrated with expert precision. As Xavier and Fiona entered their 60s, they began to slow down, letting Thomas run the daily operations while they enjoyed their twilight years. They took walks together every evening, retracing the paths they had walked as newlyweds. They sat on the porch and watched the sun set, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. "You remember that first night in the cabin?" Fiona asked one evening. "When you told me I was safe." "I remember," Xavier said. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even half frozen and terrified." Fiona laughed. "I must have looked terrible." "You looked alive," Xavier corrected. "You looked like someone who refused to give up, and I think that was when I started falling in love with you." "It was a good thing you found us," Fiona said softly. "The best thing that ever happened to me, to both of us," Xavier said. "You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. A family, a home, love, all the things I thought were not for me. They were always for you," Fiona said. "You just needed someone to show you." On a spring morning in 1923, Xavier Frost passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71. He had lived a long, full life, surrounded by love and family, and he died content. Fiona was devastated by the loss of her beloved husband, the man who had saved her life and given her everything. But she took comfort in their children and grandchildren, and in the knowledge that they had had 40 wonderful years together. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with her family and tending the flower garden she and Xavier had planted together. She spoke of him often, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had never known him in his prime. She told them the story of how they met, of the terrible blizzard and the miraculous rescue, and how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the greatest blessings. When Fiona Frost passed away in her sleep at the age of 74, she was buried beside Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and as they lowered her coffin into the ground, a light snow began to fall, dusting the Arizona mountains with white. Thomas Frost, now running the ranch with his own son, looked up at the falling snow and smiled through his tears. His mother had always said that the snowstorm that nearly killed her had actually saved her life by bringing her to his father. Now, as snow fell on her funeral, it felt like a final blessing, a closing of the circle that had begun so many years ago in that terrible blizzard. The Frost Ranch continued to prosper for generations, a testament to the love and hard work of Xavier and Fiona. Their story became family legend, passed down from parents to children, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope can find us. That love can bloom in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes being lost is the first step to being found. In a small frame on the mantel of the ranch house, there remained a photograph of Xavier and Fiona on their wedding day. They were young and hopeful, standing together with Lily between them, all three smiling at the camera. The photograph had faded with time, but the love captured in that moment remained as clear and strong as ever, a lasting memorial to two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. And on winter evenings, when the snow fell soft and thick over the Arizona mountains, the current occupants of the ranch house would look out at the white landscape and remember the story of how it all began. How Fiona Owens was lost in a snowstorm with her daughter. How a cowboy named Xavier Frost found them and said, "You're both safe." And how those simple words became the foundation of a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, echoing through the generations that followed, a testament to the enduring power of love, courage, and the kindness of strangers who become family. The ranch still stood, the mountains still loomed, and the snow still fell. But the love that Xavier and Fiona had created endured, woven into the very fabric of the land they had called home, a legacy that would never be forgotten. Their story was not just about survival or rescue or even romance, though it was all those things. It was about two people who found each other at precisely the right moment, who chose love even when it was complicated and uncertain, and who built a life together that enriched everyone it touched. And somewhere, perhaps in the whisper of the wind through the pines or the soft fall of snow on winter nights, Xavier and Fiona Frost remained together, watching over the family they had created and the land they had loved. Their story a reminder that true love never truly ends, it simply transforms, becoming part of something larger, something eternal, something that endures long after we are gone. The end of their earthly story was not really an ending at all, but a continuation, a legacy that lived on in their descendants and in the very land itself. The Frost Ranch remained a beacon of what could be built when two people chose each other, chose love, chose to face whatever came together rather than apart. And that, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of all, that we are not defined by our hardships, but by how we respond to them, and that sometimes the worst storms lead us exactly where we need to be. Xavier had told Fiona once in those early days that people underestimate what they are capable of until they are tested. They had both been tested by that blizzard, by life, by loss and hardship and uncertainty. But they had not failed. They had endured, they had loved, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. And in doing so, they had proven that even when we are lost, even when we cannot see the path ahead, even when the storm seems too fierce to survive, there is always hope. Always the possibility that someone will find us, will say the words we need to hear, will offer us safety and love and a chance at something better. "You're both safe," Xavier had said that day in the blizzard, and he had spent the rest of his life making sure those words remained true. He had kept them safe, Fiona and Lily, and eventually their growing family, not just from physical danger, but from loneliness, from despair, from the fear that they were not worthy of love. And in return, Fiona had kept him safe too, from his self-imposed isolation, from the belief that he was meant to be alone, from a life half-lived. They had saved each other, really. And that, in the end, was what love was: mutual salvation, two people making each other better, stronger, more complete. Xavier and Fiona Frost had understood that, had lived it every day of their marriage, and had passed that understanding on to their children and grandchildren. It was a gift that would keep giving long after they were gone, a light that would never go out. And so the story ended where it began, in snow, in love, in the promise of safety and home. The mountains still stood watch over the valley. The cattle still grazed the high meadows, and the ranch house still glowed with warmth and light on cold winter nights. The Frost family still gathered there for holidays, still told the story of Xavier and Fiona, still marveled at the chain of events that had led to their existence. And sometimes, on the anniversary of that fateful day when a cowboy found a woman and her daughter lost in a snowstorm, the family would raise a glass to Xavier and Fiona, thanking them for the legacy they had created, for the love they had shared, for the lives they had touched. Because some stories do not end with the end. Some stories continue forever, woven into the fabric of family and memory and love, becoming part of something immortal. This was such a story. The story of how two lost souls found each other in a blizzard, how they chose love over fear, how they built a life that mattered. It was a story worth remembering, worth retelling, worth honoring. And as long as the Frost family endured, as long as the ranch stood, as long as the snow fell on the Arizona mountains, the story of Xavier and Fiona would live on, a testament to the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the truth that sometimes being lost is just the first step to being found. Their love story had begun in desperation and fear, in a moment when death seemed certain. But it had transformed into something beautiful, something lasting, something that transcended the circumstances of its birth. And that transformation, that journey from darkness to light, from despair to hope, from loneliness to love, was what made their story worth telling. It was a reminder that no matter how lost we are, no matter how dire our circumstances, there is always the possibility of salvation, always the chance that someone will find us and say the words we need to hear. "You're both safe." And in the end, that was all any of us wanted: to be safe, to be loved, to be found. Xavier and Fiona had given that gift to each other, and through their love, had created a legacy that would endure for generations. Their story was complete, their journey finished, but the love they had created lived on, eternal and unchanging, a beacon for all who came after. This was their story. This was their legacy. This was love.